you talked about Deion and some of these other guys that were able to show personality, Ocho Cinco, et cetera. And it's always these skill positions, these other
Yes.
skill positions, right? You can be a cornerback that's dancing, high stepping on the way to the end zone, or a
Hmm.
receiver. Like no one cares that Justin Jefferson wears diamond chains under his
No.
pads because he's a receiver. It's
Right.
okay,
Right.
right? But when it's a
Sauce.
quarterback, yeah, Sauce Gardner, they have great nicknames, Pac-Man Jones, Sauce Gardner, all these guys. But this same like acceptance of eccentricity and diva qualities, if you want to call it that, just has
Right.
not made it to the quarterback position yet. Why
Not
is
yet.
that?
Because I think the quarterback position is still so tied to this mythology of rugged masculinity in the United States, right? So they're still very much kind of like the frontiersmen who's just, going to take their lunch pail to work and get it done. And I don't think we have the capacity as a consuming public to really stomach quarterbacks with a lot of personality. If we think even the long, arduous battle to have black quarterbacks. So now we're at the point where we have a ton of black quarterbacks in the league. You don't feel so attached to someone's success in a way you did, when it was like Donovan McNabb, you know what I mean? Or like even generations before, it was like Warren Moon or Doug Williams. I think even the ones who have been tremendously successful, like Jalen Hurts, is a very charismatic person, but he's not just like super extroverted and filling the room. He's sort of drawing the attention to the room with his coolness. But it's so I would say that the quarterback still has almost like, translating it to baseball, a Derek Jeter style of cool far more than any sort of bombastic personality. We don't really have the space for it yet because we're still so attached to the mythology of sort of like cool, calm, and collected quarterback.
Yeah, they still want, even though this is an era where a 5'10" quarterback is fine. Jalen Hurts is listed as 6'1", 6'2". He's probably not.
Right.
The era of the athletic quarterback is here. But I
Mm-hmm.
think in a lot of the minds of these GMs or owners, especially the owners that are ultimately
Absolutely.
making these decisions, especially a quarterback this high in the draft, they still want Johnny Unitas,
No
strong
doubt.
jawline, line, buzz cut, military cut, whatever you want to call it,
That's
stoic
it.
leadership. And what came to mind as you were talking is that, that whole thing about, being black or being a minority in America is you have to work twice as hard for half the recognition or whatever the
Absolutely.
phrase might be. And I think about guys like Mahomes who are very demonstrative, right? He is cocky. He's
Mm-hmm.
trucking a defender at the 1 yard line and he's flexing over him. He has,
Truth.
the mohawk haircut. He's doing commercials, and that's all okay because he's won 3 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
But then I think about him compared to Cam Newton, who didn't quite get there, or Colin Kaepernick, who had his signature flex where he's kissing
Right.
his bicep, or Cam
That's
Newton,
right.
where it's like these guys are all pro, MVP, Pro Bowl level quarterbacks, but they're not allowed to express themselves in the same way as Mahomes because they're not winning 3 Super Bowls or in the GOAT conversation. I mean,
Right.
what do you think of that theory or that idea when it comes, especially to Shedeur, who had great individual success at Colorado, but his win loss record is always brought up as a
Right.
negative.
Right. Right. Well, I think a couple of things. Like one, I was of the stance that whatever Shedeur, Travis, and Coach Deion were able to accomplish at Colorado was absolutely playing with house money because the program had been so awful before. If they had 3 win seasons, it would have been an accomplishment. So we need to disqualify everything from that juncture. But I think also winning does cure a lot of things. I think people are far more accepting of personalities if you're winning. I think the personality that's loud but you're losing is annoying, right? I think that's just
Yeah,
universally true.
100%.
But I also think just with the examples that you brought up of Mahomes, Kaepernick, and Cam Newton, Cam Newton is not Eurocentric. Like he is just eccentric in general and just very, very, the way he like writes captions on Instagram, the way he dresses, like the whole way he carries and stuff, it is very different for just anybody, right? And then Kaepernick, of course, with all of the work that he was doing in activism, and we've seen how he was effectively like blackballed out of the I think Mahomes, even with the bravado, and I know he recently cut off the mohawk, and I'll tie that back in to my statement. I think Mahomes moves from a very Eurocentric way of viewing himself culturally. I don't think that he moves with a sense of like my culture is grounded in an African American experience. I know that's often a sticky road for biracial people, but I think that in his uh, how he's expressed himself, the way he talks about things from what I've heard, it's not someone who's like grounded in an African American experience whatsoever. I think it's someone who's very much comfortable with being in a white sort of mainstream middle America experience. And I used the example of him cutting his hair. I saw him do a presser with presumably Kansas City reporters, and he talked about cutting off his nappy hair and just being like, I don't know why you all let me have this hair for so long. And I was just there, like, kind of appalled because, as you can see, I have my hair out, not intentionally for this part, but just out today. Patrick Mahomes' hair texture isn't much different than mine. And I think that, if you were grounded in African American cultural experience, you'd understand that the word nappy is a very loaded word, especially if you're using it outside of in a room that is not majority black. You know what I mean? So for him to say that to a room of reporters, regardless of what their racial makeup, presumably not mostly black in that space, it just
Yeah.
was
I
like,
mean, it's not
man,
like an insult in itself, but it's often used as an insult.
it's often used as an insult, but it's also very much, if you're not using it as an inside word, it's very much an insult. You know what I mean? So I think it was just very, at best, peculiar word choice. And how I received it was like troubling, like, man, like, why do you think that's okay right now? You know what I mean? So that just to me gave great insight into my general point of I don't think Mahomes' bravado is grounded in a sort of like African American expression or sort of like understood ways of expressing yourself in the black experience that I think if they were would not be as accepted even with all the winning he's doing.
It's one of those things where it's kind of hard to describe, but you know it when you see it.
1,000%.
And I totally see your point about the kind of the where he's moving from, right? He's appearing at a Morgan Wallen concert, who has,
Right.
his own complicated history with
No doubt.
slurs and other stuff that
No
he's been caught
doubt.
on camera saying. And he's not at a, I don't know, he's a Little Uzi Vert or whatever, some other
Right.
hip hop artist
He's not
concert.
gonna be at the
So
Kendrick concerts this summer. I can guarantee it, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Which is where Shedeur was probably going to be. I think people made a big deal out of the draft party that Shedeur
Right.
had at his house, and then the after party that he had after he got drafted. And these things are all, used as negatives, even though it's like this. He grew up rich. He's a rich
Yeah.
kid that's got a lot of money, whether he plays it down in the NFL or not,
Right.
because of his dad and NIL and all that stuff. So